Shabbat Shalom. I asked you before the Torah reading, to what are you enslaved, and what would it take to set you free? One of the things that I'm enslaved to is a notion that the problems of the world will not change and cannot be fixed. There are days when I look at 10,000 orphans due to Ebola, and I think about a whole generation growing up like that, or global warming, or race relations in the United States, or extreme Islam, and I'm enslaved to this idea that it's never going to get better. It doesn't apply to my individual life. I've experienced change in myself, and I've witnessed it in others. I've seen the weak become stronger. I've seen the frightened become braver. I've seen the impatient become more patient. I see it in individual relationships, but when I look at things on a global scale, it's very difficult. Someone stole my book. Hold on. Yeah, theft in the world, exactly. Thank you, Andy. So enter our Parsha and what it has to say about communal change, global change. Last week, we ended the story with Moses arriving in Egypt, and he goes into Pharaoh's palace and he says, "I'm here to free the Jewish people." And not only does Pharaoh say, "I will not let them go," he says, "Furthermore, I will take away their straw, and they will still have to make their quota with bricks." To which the Jewish people say to Moses, "Thanks a lot." To which Moses goes to God and says, "Thanks a lot." It's not going well, this change, this global vision of freedom. And that's where we pick up this week. God says to Moshe, if you'd like to follow along on page 351, "I am the Lord, I am Adonai. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, Yud-He-Vav-He. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners." In other words, I have a history with your people, and I've made you a promise, and I'm going to fulfill it. I have now heard the moaning of the Israelites because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. I know you're suffering. I've heard you. I'm going to help. Say therefore to the Israelite people, "I am the Lord. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisements." Buckle your seatbelts. It's going to get exciting. "And I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I, the Lord, am your God, who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession, I, the Lord." But when Moses told this to the Israelites, they would not listen to Moses. Their spirits were crushed by cruel bondage. Maybe if we read the text more closely, we can find some hope. To begin with, God says something interesting to Moshe. "I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but not as Yud-He-Vav-He." Well, what's the difference? They're both names for God. Ibn Ezra, a medieval commentator who loves grammar, he says the difference is that one is an adjective and one is a noun. Really, Rabbi? That's profound. Thank you very much. Yes, it is. It is. Let's say that I told you, I'll give you an analogy. Let's say that I told you I'd gone on an amazing trip to see a very famous site in northern Arizona, and I start to try to tell you about it. I say, well, it was very big. It was very colorful. It was very deep. Each of those adjectives describes an aspect of what I saw, but it's not until I give you the proper noun that you can fully envision what I'm trying to tell you. It's not until I say, "I went to visit the Grand Canyon," that you can see the whole picture. So the difference between El Shaddai And Yud He Vav He is that El Shaddai is an adjective. It describes one attribute of God. Whereas Yud He Vav He is God's proper name, and it encompasses all that God is. All right, so Ibn Ezra, if you're so clever, what is this adjective El Shaddai? He notices that the word dai is contained in it. It's a word we know from our Seder. Dai, dayenu, right? It was enough. And what Ibn Ezra says is this describes God's relationship with the patriarchs. The story of Genesis is all about God's relationship with an individual, or perhaps an individual family, but not with a nation, not with an entire people. This is a real shift. So El Shaddai, God was enough for the patriarchs. It was enough for them to have their individual relationships with God. But now we're moving into a story where an entire nation needs to have a relationship with God. We're also running into a small problem, though, because if I look at this text, I say, wait a minute. God did speak to the patriarchs with the name Yud, He, Vav, He. What are you talking about, text? I can give you examples. After the kings battle it out, the 4 kings versus the 5 kings, Abraham is getting really frustrated. He saved his nephew Lot from this battle, and he has been promised offspring, and at this point, he's taking care of his nephew, not his own children, and he says to God, where is this covenant that you've promised me? Where are my seed that are as multiplied as the stars that are going to inherit this land? And it's then when God is reassuring Abraham of the promise that he uses the name Yud He Vav He, I will maintain my covenant with you. We see it with Jacob when he's fleeing his brother Esau after stealing Esau's blessing. It's a low time. It's very hard for Jacob to believe that he'll ever have multiple offspring and return to the land of Canaan and inherit the land. So he dreams of the latter. That part most of us remember. But the rest of the dream is a prophecy, a conversation between God and Jacob. And God uses the name Yud He Vav He, and he says, I will maintain my promise to you. I'm not going anywhere. Which tells us that whenever God uses this name, he's saying, I'm going to fulfill my promise. It's going to come. And boy, does it ever, in the form of the plagues. Now, I had an interesting evening on Wednesday night working with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. Landon's in that class. And the topic of, it's a storytelling elective. We do it once a month. And the topic of the class was, what do you do when you have a familiar story everyone's heard 100 times? How do you make it interesting? And so I brought them the Parsha. And Landon and I were looking at it together, and he said, Rabbi Zelony, why did God have to make everything so hard? Why the plagues? Why the people being depressed? Why did it have to be so difficult? Because Landon's right, it could have been a not supernatural event that brought the Jews out of Egypt. They could have all just put down their mortar one day and said, there's more of us than there are of them, let's go, right? Why all of these fireworks that happen? And you'll notice, by the way, that the God in Genesis who does miracles for the forefathers and the foremothers, they're within the bounds of the natural world. They're wealthy, they're prolific, they win battles that maybe they shouldn't have won, but there's nothing supernatural. The only exception I can think of is Sodom and Gomorrah. However, by the time we have to take an entire nation into relationship with God, we've got to up the game, right? Because Landon said, I think they didn't want to leave. I think God had to make it so difficult that the Jews would never go back and the Egyptians would let them go, which I thought was a very nice insight, Landon. So getting back to me and my servitude to the idea that the world can't change. Am I missing the signs and wonders? Am I missing our Moshe? Could it be that we now live in a world that's not capable of change? Grammar to the rescue once again. This is a good day for those grammarians in the congregation. If you look about God revealing his name, God says, Ushmi Adonai lo nodati lehem. And Rashi looks at the grammar. It's translated here as I have not made myself known to them. But Rashi says that's wrong. It doesn't say, lo hodati lahem. It says, lo nodati, I was not known to them. It's not that God wasn't making God's self known, it's that we were not recognizing God. Which made me think about, perhaps I'm not recognizing God when I say that the world can't change. Maybe there are signs and wonders around me. Maybe there is a Moshe. So let's put aside most of the world's problems. Let's focus in on one problem, as the media did this week, extremist Islam. NPR ran a couple of very interesting pieces about two extraordinary men. The first is of Pakistani descent. He grew up in England, and as a young man, he was part of an extremist group. His job was to recruit people to do violence in the name of Allah. And through a series of events in his life, he ended up leaving that group, including his wife. It ended his marriage, and he walked away from his 5-year-old son to do this. And he started a think tank in England that, as an insider, he wanted to help Westerners understand how to combat extremist Islam. He is a Moshe. That is a sign and a wonder. NPR told another story of a Jordanian man who is a comic book artist. He was speaking with some school children, and he asked them, who are your heroes? He was trying to get an idea for a new superhero. They didn't have any. And when he pressed them on it, they said, well, there's this one guy that we've heard a lot about. He's very powerful. He was Osama bin Laden. Well, you can imagine that the artist was very alarmed by this, and he decided to address the problem by publishing comic books. And the heroes of these comic books, combat extremist Islam and seek out peace. He is a Moshe, he is a leader. He is trying to solve the world's problems, and it is a sign and it is a wonder. So, as I always do, I will end by encouraging us to take action. We can be a part of this shift in the world. You can help free Rabbi Zelony from her servitude to the idea that the world can't change. You can get their email addresses from NPR. You can write to them and say, I think the work you're doing is extraordinary. I heard it on the radio. I heard it from my rabbi. I support you in what you're doing. Or write a check. Help them fund their causes. Or for that matter, help fund the orphans from Ebola and global warming and all of those things. I think in the end, and it was that line that Rashi recognized that brought me into this sermon. It's not that God isn't making God's self known. It's that we have to opt to recognize God. So please help me do that this week. Shabbat Shalom.